My special guest tonight is one of our finest portrait painters, as well as being a controversial and provocative observer of the way we look. He's Jonathan Yeo. Welcome to Masterclass. When Jonathan Yeo chose the life of a portrait painter, they told him he was mad. He took no notice and proved his point with portraits of film stars like Dennis Hopper, Nicole Kidman and Kevin Spacey, politicians Tony Blair, David Cameron, George Bush. As you'd expect of a politician's son, he's got a very definite point of view and sometimes uses his work to express those opinions, resolute in his belief that a photo is a snapshot and a portrait something altogether more revealing and more profound. Ladies and gentlemen, Jonathan Yeo. I think one of the most extraordinary things a painter has accomplished now as you are is that you're self-taught. And what intrigues me about that is how do you teach yourself? How do you go about making yourself into a painter?
Well, it wasn't really a plan, so I didn't start with any kind of roadmap for how to do it. I didn't really think I'd end up necessarily succeeding in it, so it was slightly accidental. I loved doing painting, particularly portraits, from very early on from school, and there wasn't that time, that kind of painting was very out of fashion.
Sure, portraits showing 20 odd years ago, talking now, being killed by the photograph, basically, I suppose. It was not fashionable at all. Now it's entirely different.
That's right. And the sort of mantra then was sort of not just portraiture being sort of out of fashion, but painting itself. The sort of debate in the sort of art kind of history and art magazines and that kind of thing was about whether painting would ever come back at all. It seems slightly ridiculous now when the sort of most of the sort of exciting new artists are painters, often doing other things as well. They're doing sort of other practices, doing sort of installations and sort of other work. But certainly at that time, and therefore, as a result of that, very few art schools were teaching sort of any kind of figurative painting at all. So it wasn't even really an option to go and study it.
I see. You had to do it yourself, in a sense.
Yeah, pretty much. And therefore, I didn't know how to do it. I was lucky living in central London that I could go and visit sort of galleries and see some of the best painting in the world, and so that tended to be how I did it. I'd go and sort of get interested in one painter at a time.
Any painters particularly?
Well, yes. I think that one of the first ones, exhibitions that really sort of fired me up to do it was a big Picasso exhibition in London. Picasso was not thought of as a portraitist, but a lot of his most powerful pictures were portraits, and I was just sort of amazed by the power of these pictures, and I loved this sort of his kind of particular, unusual and powerful sort of style, and so that was probably the first thing that really got me into it. I
often get an urge when I go to an art gallery to nick a painting. I really do. I mean, they're so seductive. Oh, I want to take that home with me. Yeah. Did you ever have that feeling when you're looking around art galleries?
Yeah, unfortunately, the ones I like were often much too big to sort of stick in my coat. But yes, it's interesting that this is often sort of the pictures which really make you want to sort of own them, keep on looking at them. Absolutely.
That's right. So, have you ever felt like, since you've become successful, learning how to paint?
Well, I think I'm still learning.
You think so?
Well, yeah, I think so. I think definitely, as you go on, you get interested in different things, and so just because you've got the hang of doing one bit of it, it doesn't stop you. You constantly find some new things to explore. I think that's what keeps it interesting in a way. Certainly, I feel at the moment there's a whole lot of stuff I want to try next. So I'm very aware of it at the moment.
But conversely, do you feel that lack of formal training has been a help to you? Because you've made, you don't just stick to doing conventional portraitures. We'll see as we go through the program. You have a wide range of the way that you communicate. And you use portraiture as a kind of narrative sense as well, as we'll see later.
Yes, I think my interest was basically in faces. And I remember from early on at school, when I was sort of bored at school, I'd do drawings of the teachers, and I quickly learned that was a way of making people laugh and sort of, getting a little bit of sort of kudos. I carried on. That was the sort of the starting point for it all. I've done sort of things sort of diversified a bit, as you know. But I think that, and it may be that, not having been sort of taught anything, but had a sort of rather sort of strange, eclectic introduction to it, and sort of picked on artists that just, randomly interested me at the time, may explain why it's still, stepping back and looking at the work sort of as a whole, it does seem quite eclectic and sort of and not so totally consistent. There's no one obvious sort of style running through it. But I think that sometimes works well from the point of doing sort of actual portraits of people, because there's a sort of range of personalities who come and sort of sit. It's pretty eclectic and quite eccentric, and it's quite nice to be able to sort of take completely different approaches for different people, I think. You
once said too that you would never been an artist had you not had Hodgkin's disease, which is a form of lymphatic cancer. Why was that? How did that determine your career?
Well,
you were what, 20 at the time? 22.
Yeah, I was about 22. I think there's 2 points of view. I think probably the reason I said that was because at that time, when you're sort of thinking what you're trying to work out what you're going to do with your life, people around you, totally with your sort of best interests at heart, try to dissuade you from, going into a profession which is, so chancy. I don't know if I'd encourage my own kids to do it or not. It's a really tricky one. Obviously, if you get lucky like I have and things go your way, then it's a fabulous thing to be able to do. But at that stage, when you've got very little reason, no one's buying your pictures, no one's giving you any encouragement, you haven't had any training in it, there's no obvious way into it. I think that illness, in a way, I think it makes you suddenly very, very stubborn and very focused. And at that age, you've never really had to sort of contend with the idea that you might not live till a grand old age. And suddenly that's presented to you as a serious possibility. It makes you sort of think, well, right, I'm going to, actually spend my time doing what I want in case I don't have very much of it.
And also, too, I would imagine, being treated for it, what chemotherapy was, that you would actually, that would be a kind of release from it in a sense. You were doing something to take your mind off it.
Yes, well, I think that was it. I think I sort of threw myself into it as a distraction. And I think that, in a way, I think there's also that sort of period, even after the illness, I was sort of laid low for quite a while. And when you've got cancer, very few people are going to want to give you any more bad news. And so they don't. There was no, even the people I think who probably sort of wanted to say, look, the work's really not that good. You should sort of really think about getting a day job. Didn't dare say it. So I kind of got through that first couple of years when I really had no idea what I was doing, and just managed to get a bit lucky and sort of had a couple of commissions and things just sort of got a bit of traction by the time I was out of that phase.
No, we met because Sandy Nairn at the National Portrait Gallery put us together when he wanted a painting of me in the National Portrait Gallery, and I met you and we had this kind of dance around each other, it struck me then, before we actually went into the studio, that your job was very much like mine in certain stages, in that we have to get to know a stranger very quickly. And you have to put that stranger in a situation where he or she believes your friend, long-lasting friend. But I only say that by way of introducing this bit of video because I wanted to actually indicate to you how I came to this situation where I was sitting opposite you and thinking, he's doing exactly to me what I do to people. Let's have a look at when I visited Johnny's studio. Johnny, this is the second time I've sat for you. And I have to say that exploring this relationship between sitter and an artist, I found it a lot easier myself this time. I feel a lot more relaxed, and maybe I look different because of that, because, you know, there isn't that kind of initial tension there is when you meet somebody for the first time.
I think the first couple of times people come to the studio, it's never a completely relaxed occasion, you know, they're not quite sure what to expect. Lights shining on them, me staring. People don't really relax into it until sort of maybe the third or fourth time. On the whole, people might sort of come the first time, hair done, made up, everything, but gradually they sort of like kind of let it slide. But also, people look very different on different days, and so, you know, according to what's been going on in that week in your life, and people are in different moods on different days. That's why it's sort of it's very important to see people, you know,
across a period of time.
Yeah.
So, is there any regular time scale to doing a portrait, or does it have a different time span?
Each one has a sort of life of its own. Sometimes you work someone out sort of quicker than you expect. Something, and it's not even that you work someone out. It's just it's not a conscious process of, say, deciding you're going to make someone look a certain way. You just sort of like to filter what's there and what interests you most about the face onto the sort of canvas. Right. The first thing you do will be right. And so the trick there is not to keep going too long and mess it up.
Yes,
but other times, you know, you start and it's not right, and you may even sort of scrap it and start again. I tend to start with big sort of patchy areas of colour, and sometimes they stay like that. The one we did for the portrait gallery, sort of that became the sort of the dynamic of the picture.
Yes.
Was using this heavy brush strokes to sort of like create sort of a movement and energy, and sort of make the whole thing more engaging and sort of energised. And that may happen again too now. You can't do that so easily with younger faces, so it's fun doing it with sort of like kind of grown-ups basically. I tend to sort of draw and photograph people the first time I meet them because, you know, partly as a way of just getting through that stage of them being sort of not relaxed about it. The next time they come, then you've got a better idea of what you're doing, and you're trying to see if the actual reality of what they look like is anything like, you know, what you thought it was, and so you're correcting it. But also, things you can't get from photographs are the way the sort of face changes when it reacts to things, when someone's happy or sort of amused by something, or sort of reflective. That does different things to the face, and so you want to see as many of those as possible and try and find a way of shoehorning several into the picture, because that way you get a sort of image which is a sort of a whole combination of different expressions, which just will make the whole thing more interesting and more intriguing and a bit more enigmatic, hopefully.
What's the most important part of the face for you? What is the one which gives you most clue? Is it the eyes? Is it the mouth? What is it?
Yeah, the eyes are the most revealing. I mean, the mouth is important because it's what the expression someone's projecting, and sometimes involuntarily people will react with their mouth as well. But sometimes people will sort of, you know, try and make an expression with their mouth, whereas actually what they're thinking is reflected through their eyes.
Yes.
I mean, some people can lie with their eyes as well. I mean, actors and sometimes politicians who are very sophisticated actors themselves can be very kind of convincing with their eyes, even when they're saying something they don't mean, or they're just playing the part. Or an actor will come in and sort of not know what to do, so they play the part of the artist model, I guess. Portraits generally are most powerful if you're engaging someone directly, because if you get the eyes right and they pull you in, it's hard to sort of get away from it.
See, that engagement is exactly what interviewing is about. It is about an engagement. And if you don't engage, and sometimes that happens, it doesn't work. Do you get the same thing as a painter?
Yes. I mean, if you find someone very dull, that's a problem, because then chances are you'll find the picture less interesting, and the whole thing will just like not be much fun to do, and therefore not much fun to look at. But it doesn't matter if you dislike someone, as long as you've had some sort of reaction to them. That, I think, is the key to it. You need to have some sort of emotional response to them.
But if you dislike someone, does that show in the painting? Do you actually let your feelings in that sense?
Well, I always worry that it will, but then people, I think people, almost by definition, someone deciding to sit for a portrait has a level of self-awareness and interest in themselves. The only times it's happened when I really disliked someone and I felt I'd shown it, they loved the picture because almost, in each case, of course, the characteristics I didn't like in them, they loved them themselves. I guess otherwise they wouldn't be like that.
But let's look at some other people, more powerful than I. Let's wander across here now and have a look at these paintings. Now, you did a series of paintings, collage, actually. And this is a painting of George W. Bush, which is a very good, strong painting, except if you get very close to this painting, you'll find it's made up of pornographic images taken from top-shelf pornographic magazines, right? And if you go very close in on George, you'll see that he's got a nipple on his nose. He's got two nipples on his nose, in fact. And if you look more closely around his face, which we not going to do, you'll see scenes that make your granny blush or probably faint. So this is part of an exhibition that you did using pornography to build a painting to make a point. Now with Bush, the fact is that you didn't like him.
Yes, well, and actually this one kind of predates the exhibition. Actually, this was I didn't go into it planning to do a whole load of those pictures. It was it had occurred to me that collage would be an interesting way of making a portrait, partly because of the way I often fragment the pictures anyway with the paint. And if you were going to do a collage of a face, you might as well use skin tones. So pornography was, the logical sort of medium to use. But also, the fun of it is...
Why pornography? Because they have better skin tones.
Are there everywhere.
Right. And what do you find? What particular area of skin?
I'm very careful with my skin tones. I'm very precise with these things. You have to take them very seriously.
Yes.
But the...
So if I were to do the similar, which magazine would you recommend?
But I now know probably more than I need to about these things. Yes. There are certain sort of specialist magazines. Basically, the first thing I found was you can't just go to the newsagent and sort of clear the top shelf because all those magazines, mostly American ones, are much too Hollywood. They're all sort of beautifully lit. Everyone's sort of like blemish-free. Loads of fake tan, soft lighting and everything. And so people, all the skin tones are basically shades of orange. And a bit too shiny. And if you're trying to get a sort of, the sort of skin of a 50-year-old man, and also put in shadows and things that you want, and sort of use the colours you would as a painter, you have to get things, the real sort of colours that are in people's skin. So you also need the sort of greens and blues and sort of and preferably sort of, bits that haven't been too well kept up, so that you know what it's come from. You need sort of, hairs and details and that kind of thing.
That kind of thing, all right.
Anyway,
All right.
so I had this sort of image, which was a bit like that, because I thought that was an interesting portrait image. I quite liked the idea
It's a beautiful.
that there's a guy, the idea was sort of how he might look on Mount Rushmore. I imagine he sort of saw himself as one of the great American leaders, and so this is how you might sort of be looking up to him, carved into stone. So I just trying to go for a slightly ironic sort of pose. And then the sort of pornography was a sort of secondary sort of humorous thing. I didn't know what I was going to do with it. I didn't know if it would work. I vaguely thought I might sort of send it over and say, here's your portrait, and see if they put it up. And, it might be a while before they notice. If you're far enough away, you don't see the detail.
Absolutely not at all. You have to get very close to see the detail. So let's move on now. And see, this is Erin O'Connor. And we all have seen this lady on photographs, and I think that's one of the nicest, best pictures that you've done, actually, from my point of view, of women. So I think it's got a lovely sort of style to it, also Art Deco style, and there's a lovely, graceful shape to it as well. So did she ask you to paint?
Yeah, I mean, it was an interesting one. I said, she asked me to do it. I said, why? You've got sort of so many great images of you around anyway. And she said, but that's exactly why I'm interested in having a painting. This was 7 or 8 years ago, I think, and at this point in my life, when I'm sort of, my face is my currency. I'm on sort of magazine covers, in adverts and everything, but it's never actually me. There's always, someone's got an agenda. It's, the sort of magazine editor or publisher or the stylist or the advertiser I'm advertising for. There's always someone else deciding how I'm going to look. And so at this point in my life, when it's exactly this is what I'm about, I want to have something where it's just me and not about anything else.
And was she happy with that?
Yeah, I think so. And I think I went into it not really knowing what I was going to do with it. I didn't have a plan for it, and so it's difficult, especially painting someone who's young and very good looking and very interesting looking and who's very used and knows what they look like as well. It's quite intimidating.
That's lovely. And what about, talking about intimidating, our friend Mr. Hopper here? How intimidating was he?
He was one of those people who is exactly who you expect him to be straight away. You meet him and it's a bit like meeting an old cowboy. He has a sort of swagger and a poise and talks with that sort of wonderful sort of Kansas accent. And you think at some point it's going to drop. And it never does. And even when I went to stay with him in California to do the painting, I ended up staying with him a couple of times and getting to know him very well. And at no point does it ever change. That was absolutely who he was. Or if it was an act, he obviously been doing it for so long he'd forgotten how to do anything else. The thing for me also, which was most enjoyable really, was the fact that I think he had a passion for art, which was kind of outweighed his sort of passion for what he did for films. He said he saw acting as a sort of dirty day job to fund his sort of own art and art collecting and that kind of thing. I don't know how serious that was, but certainly that was his sort of big passion in life. And so it was lovely working with someone who has such a massive breadth of knowledge. Knew far more about it than I did. But it's just a great learning experience.
You liked him, and it shows. It shows in the painting. Eyes are great. Okay, let's have a question now from the audience. First up, Francis Martin. Francis, your question.
Did you feel a greater pressure to succeed when painting a well-known personality compared to other sitters, and in particular the first time you painted a celebrity?
In a way, you try to put it out of your mind who they are beforehand, because you don't want to be too influenced by what you've seen of them before. You want to try and get who they actually are, if you can. Inevitably, sometimes there is that pressure. Sometimes people just arrive with such a sort of presence, or you have such an expectation of them that you can't avoid that coming into it a bit. I mean, it's not so much a pressure for it to go right, probably unless they're paying for it, obviously. It's more to do with, I think, your own sort of sense that you know that if there's someone very interesting, that you can do something incredible with it. And so it does feel worse to sort of come up with something that's only sort of average.
And the next question from Aaron Hanafi. Aaron?
Hey, my own work is predominantly figurative, and it seems, well, at least I've noticed, that figurative seems to be quite a dirty word in contemporary art teaching and practice. How do you feel about this?
Yeah, well, we were talking about that. I mean,
Yeah.
it's. I think that has been the case for a while. I think it's changing, and certainly going to the exhibitions now, the art fairs, which has become the big sort of international kind of forum for sort of seeing work. I think it's a fashion thing. I think when I was your age, it was all about abstract expressionism, minimalism, video installations, and whereas there's still quite a lot of that, it doesn't dominate it totally anymore. And so I think it's a great time to be doing what you're doing. And I've been lucky with the timing. If I'd been doing this probably 20 years earlier, it would have been much harder. I think people are sort of ready for it again now, and generally, for narrative in art, I think sort of people want there to be a story which they can kind of relate to.
We're talking about that narrative in art is what we'll be talking about in just a moment. Thank you for your questions. Thank you so much. I think what makes you particularly interesting as an artist is that it'd be wrong just to call you a portrait artist, because you use that device to actually do many other things. We've seen the George Bush, the satirical nature of that, an opinion there on the canvas as much as anything else. And now you've done this series about plastic surgery, in which again, the narrative is, or the question is actually, I suppose, why? And you've made statements going right the way to body surgery and facial surgery. Now, first of all, where did you get that idea from?
I've been interested in the sort of idea of plastic surgery. I mean, as a portraitist, it's one of the big problems, professional problems of of this time. It's this thing, we are as animals kind of wired to read faces so precisely that the first thing we do when we look at someone, we sort of millionths of a second work out whether they're a potential sort of threat, friend, what's going to happen next, what mood they're in. So many things are just like worked out straight away. And so as soon as you start messing with those things, when you do a facelift, not just, this bit of the face that lifts up, but they pull it up here. And so all the muscles in the face get moved around as well. So suddenly you are in a situation where you're no longer able to read people's faces right. And for me, that's a problem, because it's all about getting things in the right place to sort of like convey these sort of things. And it's becoming, it's obviously it's happening very fast and progressing very quickly. There are stories about babies now who don't bond with their mothers because their sort of facial expressions aren't, doing what they're supposed to be doing. And so it just seemed, I was trying to find a way into it anyway. And then by chance, a surgeon friend of mine also came to me with this idea and said, look, you've got to, look, for heaven's sake, if Michelangelo was around now, this is what he'd be painting. This is the sort of, it's science meets art, and it's absolutely a sort of story about, contemporary culture and psychology and so many things wrapped up. It was too, it was too irresistible not to do.
And then certain surgeons gave you photographs that they'd taken at various stages of their work, and also then you observed yourself operations, didn't you?
Yeah.
Did you have any misgivings about you obviously have to have the permission of the person involved, and you got that, but do you have any misgivings yourself about what you're looking at and why?
I started from a position, I suppose, of being worried about it, so therefore that is a sort of a misgiving in a sense, but I also felt there's a debate that's polarized. People are either absolutely for, if you read the sort of a lot of the sort of fashion world, see plastic surgery as a natural extension of sort of makeup and having your hair done and any sort of beauty treatment. And on the other extreme is the tabloids, the Daily Mail, those sort of people who are absolutely clear that it's wrong, that it's cheating, and that people shouldn't do it. Or at least that's the impression I had at that time. And so, but of course, the reality is it's an area that's developing so fast and expanding, and so many more people are doing it, all the time, that it's sort of mad to sort of be asking whether something should happen or not when it's
the question to ask, I suppose, is with techniques developing, how far does it go? I mean, what does it become in the end?
Yeah, well, exactly. I think it may well be in 100 years, so much money and effort and resources will have been poured into it, because I'm sure vanity must be the most lucrative business of all. That you'll probably be able to pop a pill in your lunch break and sort of by tea time look 10 years younger. But we're not there yet, and I think that even then they'll suddenly look back at this period when you had to go for an operation and it was risky, it was painful, it was expensive, and even after you've gone through it, assuming it went okay, there was still a high chance that it would be noticeable that you had it done. It will seem very curious, I think, and slightly barbaric, and therefore it just seems like an obvious thing to be, as a portrait painter, to be using as a subject.
Let's have a look. Let's go across here now. This first painting is very interesting because you made the point there that a lot of people think, oh, I'm going to have a facelift. And well, it's not quite like that. It's a very serious operation and a long and painful recovery.
Yeah.
And as you said, things can go wrong. Now, this is a portrait you made of a woman who just had a facelift, right?
Yeah, exactly. She'd just come out of the operation. She looks Asian, but she isn't. She's American, and I love this because it looked like she staggered out of a sort of, a jungle in the Far East during a war. I mean, it didn't feel like she'd just come out of a sort of elected operation. There's such a vulnerability about it. I don't think for a second I'm going to sort of persuade people to do it or not. They've already made up their minds whether they would want to or not. But I think that people don't necessarily think about the actual process and what a massive thing it is and how sort of traumatic it is for the system, even when it goes well.
Yes.
She looked fine a week later.
Yes. What about the surgeons themselves? Let's wander down. I mean, you called, in some research I read, you said that they were artists. Do you think they are?
I think they are. I mean, I think that they're sculptors. But they have to. They're making aesthetic decisions. And I've argued with doctors about this. Some agree, some vehemently disagree, and think that it's absolutely science, and you shouldn't confuse anything by suggesting that it's art. But these guys are having to make aesthetic decisions and make this sort of leap of imagination that the body one day can look different and how it should look. And that's the same decisions I make when I'm sort of making something myself. And in a way, what they're doing is, is much more relevant and profound and sort of, universal, because they're actually remaking people's bodies.
So this was obviously it's a breast reduction there, and these are the marks the surgeon makes and operates.
Exactly. I mean, what I loved about these marks, obviously, have been done by the surgeon just before surgery. So on the one hand, it's a straightforward sort of nude torso. It's a classical nude in a way. I mean, basically, I'm not doing anything different from what sort of painters have been doing for hundreds of years. But it's just these markings which are sort of casually done, apparently. I mean, I think you made a little mistake there. Whoops. The knife's going to be going through there in about 10 minutes' time. It's this sort of casual savagery of it, which is kind of mesmerising. You're sort of seeing the before and after and the operation all in one image. And going back to the idea of the surgeon as the artist, I mean, here he is literally making pictures on someone's body.
Yes.
And making patterns, and it almost looks sort of tribal.
Let's move on now to this. This is the breast enlargement, obviously before and after. And one's bound to say that both look perfectly beautiful to me. I mean, it makes you wonder why she bothered. I mean, what's wrong? Again, the sort of question is always, isn't it, with something like that, that there's obviously some profound, I don't know, psychological problem going on, which may have gone back to early days, I don't know. But, if I were a woman and those were mine, I wouldn't want to change.
Well, it's interesting.
Would you?
I think you're right. I mean, it was interesting having these pictures in the studio, and so often people will come in and a group of people will be split evenly about whether they preferred before and after, or before or the after. And you realise it's so subjective, and the surgeon presumably prefers the after. There's so many different sort of preferences and tastes. The fact is, as you sort of alluded to, I think it's much more psychological than physical. People have at some point, been told that they look wrong, whether it's their sort of nose looks funny or their breasts look wrong, whatever, and that stayed with them for years.
Yes.
And I think people get so. It's very easy for people to blame other things in their lives going wrong because of some physical defect they feel is holding them back. And in a way, if that's the case, that they really believe that their life's going to be better for having, their ears pinned or their whatever changed, it can be a self-fulfilling thing. I mean, a lot of the surgeons would say that people's lives, do get better because they expect it to, and it's just they go into life with a sort of more confident and sort of optimistic attitude.
Now let's take a couple of questions from the audience. Martin Burrow. Martin, your question. Where's Martin? There you are, Martin.
Jonathan, in your exhibition, You're Only Young Twice, there are no men represented. Why is that?
That's a good question. I thought about it. Basically, I mean, two reasons. Partly, most of the surgical operations at the moment are still women. I think it was about 99%. It's now less than that. There are more men having it, but it's still at least 90% women. And I think I also wanted to focus on, for the first show of this stuff, on things which people, I think, are most interested in, and which is the main subject for sort of discussion and debate, and which I found most interesting. Changing faces obviously is my personal sort of main interest, and breast operations, enlargements, reductions, partly because they're sort of obvious, I think, and partly the media have been very interested in that now for a while, was a logical thing as well. Plus, it was a way of sort of doing kind of classical sort of nudes and torsos and things which has a long kind of art historical sort of legacy, and just bringing it up to date, with a sort of simple reference. And so that was the reason. I do intend to get onto those. There are lots of fascinating operations, and I'm hoping some of my friends will have their sort of breasts reduced and let me sort of do the before and after them.
Jonathan, thank you. Now, just in the final couple of minutes, we'll debate this this painting. You see, I think that's and I like that painting. I tell you what the difference is. Can we get the other one up on the monitor? The one now, that's the painting you did for the National Portrait Gallery, and I think that's me in interviewing mode, looking at somebody I don't really know, and trying to get to know him. I think that's a picture of somebody looking at a mate. We've had several bottles of wine, haven't we, in between now and then? And I think that's the difference. And it's very interesting, that, because it just shows how when you relax in somebody's company because you know them better, the facial muscles change, the way that you relax more. That's a very much more relaxed face than that one, the other one, isn't it? Do you think?
Yeah.
You're not still convinced that's finished, are you?
No. Well, there's still some. I mean, I've noticed a couple of things just now. But it's inevitable.
Oh, expect me now.
I think it's inevitable that people, the first time they come and, I mean, you know, like some coming on to a show like this, you're very used to it. I'm not here.
Yes.
I'm so used to doing the painting that when people come in and to be under the scrutiny of someone and know that what they're doing is going to be sort of like they're recorded. I think people are uneasy the first time.
Yes.
I get sort of glib about it because I'm used to doing it. But you do notice that people, the first couple of times that people sit for you, you're not really going to get them, and so it is just as useful. I mean, I'll sort of draw and take photos and do anything rather than commit to canvas now, because I've learned that so often if you start too quickly, you'll end up sort of going back and starting all over again.
Yes. That brings to mind, there was a couple of wonderful quotes which I'd like just to finish on, which I came across, was John Singer Sargent, who was a fair portrait painter himself, of course, late 19th, early 20th century, said, every time I paint a portrait, I lose a friend. Would that be true in your case? In your case, we gained one, didn't you, really?
Well, yeah, actually, I think that's the thing now. You get to know someone in a way you never get a chance to. It's such a you know, a treat, a privilege to have sort of time, you know, to kill with people, you know, in the way we used to have time to sort of hang out and get to know someone when we were kids. It does not happen as you get older and busier, and so it's you know, it's a fabulous sort of thing to be able to do. And you know, sometimes you do end up friends with people. We'll
end this little session with a quote from Billy Hughes, who was an old-time Australian Prime Minister, who said, when having my portrait painted, I don't want justice, I want mercy. I feel the same. All right, let's have the final question of the evening then from Gideon Summerfield. Gideon?
What advice would you give a young artist like me who is interested in developing his skills in portraiture?
Hi, Gideon.
Hi.
I think that the most useful thing I could have been told was probably just to do what you want to do, and it sounds a very obvious thing, but I think when you're starting off, you tend to sort of perhaps look too reverentially at the works of the past and see it as too much of a template of how you should do things. And actually, it's by being kind of, you know, absolutely doing what you feel like doing, and I mean, you know, experiment and try, you know, different ways, you know, into it. But absolutely, you know, don't base what you're doing on what anyone else has done. Sounds slightly counterintuitive because I learned by learning from other people's work. But I think that if you need to, you obviously need to learn what you're doing. But I think you just need to have, you know, whatever interests you most in it is bound to be what you do best, and is most likely to be interesting to other people too, because it's less likely to be something they've seen before.
Thank you.
And if I were in the audience, the question I'd ask you would be, if there's one person, dead or alive, you could paint. I love these kind of questions. Who would it be?
That changes all the time. Wow. It used to be Bin Laden when he was around, just because as a historical figure who we don't know much about, he was, you know, so influential of his time. Less interesting now. I don't know. I think genuinely, I would go for an artist probably, because they are, you know, you learn so much from someone who does something sort of similar to you. The times I've done that so far have been very revealing. I think it'd have to be Picasso, I guess, because he was the one who sort of awakened my interest in the first place.
Good. Picasso it should be. Jonathan Yale, thank you very much indeed. Johnny Yale.
Thank you.